Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Waking Up with Flyer and Ice, a week in review. With me, as always, is Nick the Scout Tosti. I am Dan Green. We are Heat Ratio Sports Network. Please follow us on YouTube. Tap that bell, and you will get notified when we go live. And as always, go to our Linktree page on our Twitter account, and you can see all the podcasts we are affiliated with. Nick, pleasant good morning to you.
Good morning. Happy Sunday.
Yeah, we're getting close to, from a teacher's perspective, Christmas break, and everyone's perspective, Christmas holidays just around the corner. So the light
Happy
is at the end of the tunnel.
Everybody. Yeah,
I agree. Now, before we get into the business at hand of the Flyers past week, it looks that the ugly COVID surge is taking place again. Boston, Nashville, Toronto, Vancouver are all going to be postponed through the holiday break. What are your thoughts on what this means moving forward?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I understand the protocols, and I don't know, what is the long-term plan here with how the remainder of this season is going to play out, given the fact that there is going to be, it looks to be another resurgence of, with this new Omicron variant coming out, how this is going to affect, more than just sports going forward. But you can see right now, particularly what's happening in the NHL and the NFL, with the Eagles game being moved to Tuesday night. I understand there might have been some adjustments in the protocols in both of those leagues moving forward, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I saw a statement from the commissioners of both leagues saying that they were planning on relaxing the testing restrictions for players that have been fully vaccinated, and just kind of staying on top of the unvaccinated players and testing them more often. To I don't know. That's. We're on a different road right now coming into this hockey podcast, and I get it. This is something that a lot of people obviously are talking about and want to have answers to. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially since those teams have their season has been postponed for at least 2.5 weeks now. So. And where they pick up, and where do those makeup games happen? Is it there going to be, I gotta expect that there's going to be an extension of the season, and where we typically will see the ending of the regular season in May. We possibly could have some summer hockey this year.
Yeah, it's still an unknown. I mean, even the scientists truly don't know what the right answer is. I mean, I think what you were referring to is they were going to. Anyone that was vaccinated that feels fine essentially is not going to get tested. So in theory, you could have a bunch of asymptomatic people on the field or in the rink. They just don't realize it because they're not being tested. Now, if I'm asymptomatic and feeling fine, and then I somehow give it to you, maybe you won't feel fine. That's the question mark I have with it, if that's the way they're going to go. Ultimately, I think it's a good bet. The Olympics are done.
Right.
I hope they don't go to the Olympics, and we'll see if a future bubble arises again. But it looks like the Montreal scene was a little scary when you saw a completely empty stadium. It was not something I wanted to see. So let's get down to hockey now.
It was scary on a lot of different levels, the Montreal scene.
Yeah, we'll address that too. We'll address that too. So, Nick, give me your. We were with Zach last week, and we had a little comical moment where Zach gave an answer to a question that was it was a good answer, and then your answer was spot on. I said that was the answer I was looking for. Please rehash the answer I asked regarding how will they build on the previous 2 wins and what they need to do moving forward. What was your line?
Right. Well, we were talking about, I think we were kind of getting close to wrapping up the show and discussing this past week, which was obviously last week, was the upcoming week, the games against Ottawa, Montreal, and who am I missing? Devils.
Oh, this week.
Yeah,
the Devils. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were doing our predictions on Devils, Montreal, Ottawa. And, some of the conversation, I think, was, Zach was, we just, it doesn't, whether they win or lose, we just want to see them go out and play a good system, play hard, play smart, do all those things, which is, yes, that's true. At the end of the day, when you play the system that you're practicing and you're disciplined and you are waiting for your opportunities in a more patient way and more puck support and playing a good brand of hockey and getting good goaltending, you should win the game. And, we were going through our predictions and, I felt like that was going to happen with both the Devils and Ottawa, 2 home games. And it just that typical letdown game in between against Montreal was just so obvious for me. And I think a lot of people, and that was very discouraging, but at the end of the day, they're playing a good brand, for the most part, they're playing a much better brand of hockey than with Yo, behind the bench. And I don't know why that is. We were talking, a little bit before the show and trying to identify what kind of a system Vigneault was implementing, because it was just so haphazardly all over the place, stemming from the way we break out of the defensive zone, where now we're seeing a conscious effort by Yo, I would think, in practice to manage the puck support coming out of the defensive zone and having more of a 5-team, 5-player, system. Not, we were seeing players dart out into the neutral zone when, defenseman was barely just getting possession of the puck, looking for somebody to outlet. And which we're not seeing that. We're seeing much better control coming out of the defensive zone, much better puck support, clean through the neutral zone, which we talk about is so incredibly important, and then maintaining possession in the offensive zone. They're definitely getting to the net more, which I love. We're not seeing that. I mean, it was just, were situations where we had possession and we were either shooting from the blue line with no screen, and then no rebound opportunities and things of that nature. So obviously we're seeing a lot better when it comes to that. And give credit to Mike Yo for that, because I think he saw what a lot of us saw, what we saw, and what most of the very smart, intelligent Flyer fans have seen through that last stretch with Vigneault. And he looks to be on a mission to correct that part of it before, the pep rally stuff and all that, and motivating your team, which is incredibly important. But I think, you can't have any of that. You can't have success unless you have success with your system first.
And it also goes to make you think about, he was in charge of the defenseman. And right. we wanted his head on the platter when he was the assistant coach. And now that he's the head coach, look how the defensemen are thriving. They're joining the rush. I don't think they have there must have been some kind of pressure. Like if you join the rush, you better get your butt. They must have been playing on eggshells with Vigneault.
Right.
Because we'll get to Sanheim in a minute about how he looks like a totally different hockey player. And Ristolainen to some extent also. It's just fascinating how a tweak here, a tweak there with a system can make a player completely different, and then obviously build confidence. And that's at least what's happening with Yo. Now, obviously it takes a while for the system to get understood, to get fully implemented. And it's funny, the Montreal game stood out as a stinker, but we still garnered a point. Last night's game was like I referenced it as a Jekyll and Hyde kind of game, but we garnered 2 points. So essentially, we've gotten points in, was it five? We've got 9 out of 10 points in our past 5 games, or
I don't think it's quite that many. So if you just go this past week, we had 5 points in 3 games, right?
Well, we had 2 game winning streak going into these 3 games. So
right. So 5, 6, so
5 times 2 is 10.
Yeah.
9 out of 10.
Yeah.
So it's like, you can't really ask for better than that, but it's the way they got those points that make you still have the but feeling. For example, the Vegas game. The fact that they were in the game with Vegas, who were playing well at the time, that was a Carter Hart game. He stole that game. He was brilliant. They played a hapless Coyotes team that we won. It was a sloppy game, but we won. And then we played, I thought, a terrific game against New Jersey, who's had our number for the past year and a half. And we beat them 6-1. We didn't have a single power play, which is criminal, to be honest with you. You can't dominate a game and not have a penalty called on behalf of your team. So that was a joke. But we beat them 6-1, and then we had the stinker against Montreal. Now, do you think the game against Montreal was more of a, oh my God, there's no fans, there's no internal atmosphere that the players are feeling? Or were they taking Montreal lightly, despite the fact they recently themselves had a 10-game losing streak? What were your thoughts on that?
I mean, that could come into play. Obviously, you've got an energy level that you're trying to achieve over the course of a game. But there was just no energy at all in that game. It was very sporadic, extremely sporadic, almost non-existent. And God, I can't believe I sat through and watched that whole game. It was so boring, just so like, what's going on? Where's the energy? When are things going to happen? And it was, they were down 1-0, and then they tied it up 1-1. The final was it went into overtime, tied 1-1, was it?
Yeah. I'll double check, but
it was just, I think, Dan, maybe, I mean, yes, I got to think that if you're a professional hockey player, you feed off the energy, whether you're in your own rink or when you're in the away rink. But it was just, it looked like after playing a really good game against the Devils, obviously a great game against the Devils, Montreal was a team they were just supposed to go in there and handle. And again, we talked about it last week, and I felt like that it's just so typical of what goes on with this organization over the last couple of years. And, these are the kinds of games that when you lose them, you look back at the end of the year and you start pinpointing what happened over the course of the season and where the wins and losses were, and particularly where the losses were. And you circle that game on the calendar, and not to mention some of the, the Devils and some of the other games they had played, earlier in the year.
Yes.
Good hockey teams, whether they're coming out of this drought with, the intention to move forward and try to advance, again, the goal is to get to the playoffs. You've got to come out there with much more energy and much more, focus on what it is that you need to do to beat teams like Montreal. And they just did not do that.
Yeah. The score was 3-2. If you recall,
3-2.
Jackson Cates and Willman, both unheralded players on this team, were our only goal scorers.
Yeah.
But I would say that game and the game that we were all disgusted with, the 3-0 loss to New Jersey, perhaps were the most unwatchable hockey games probably in the past 10 years. It was just that bad a brand of hockey. Now, let's talk about Travis Sanheim. We just referenced that, at least we talked during our pre-show, that he had moments 3 years ago. I think he had that game where he scored 2 goals in one game. He had flashes. But then really the past 2 years, he's almost been unnoticeable on the ice. And most of this year, we were calling for, where have you gone, Nick Seeler, to take his spot. And we knew Sanheim had way more talent, but he wasn't showing anything. He was unnoticeable. And at least Sealer's added the physicality, and now Connaughton is, I guess, essentially Sealer with a little more speed and a better shot. But Sanheim has been noticeable. He's been the best player on the ice at times. It just goes to show you that with the right coaching staff, with the right system, with confidence, a player could flip the script. And I think that's what we're seeing in Travis Sanheim, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, you don't, depending upon the style of defenseman you're talking about, you don't always want your defenseman to be noticeable, right? So, but in Sanheim's case in particular, you do, because he's got some offensive ability, even though we've had some discussions with some previous guests that have been on the show about the argument that could be made that he is not an offensive defenseman. And I disagree with that. He's an offensive defenseman in a different kind of way. Is he a puck moving defenseman? No. A Gostisbehere type? No, he's not. But he's an instinctive offensive defenseman in the sense that he likes to join the rush and knows when to join the rush, and has got the hockey IQ to understand where to be. And then also get the support, from our wingers to understand the fact that, you are losing a defenseman when you're in the rush, and then they could compensate for what happens in transition in the event that you're not producing in the offensive zone. So, Sanheim listen, you talk about a skill set. He's got an incredible skill set. He's a very, very, very smart player. He is a little aggressive, and that can sometimes hurt, when you talk about his defensive abilities. I notice a lot when they're getting back into defensive mode in transition, when, the opponents are coming down with the puck. I don't love his gaps. He can be a little too aggressive on his gaps and then get beat and then have some mishaps happen. Defensively, but he's young, he's still learning, and we're nowhere near. I think over the long haul, he could be a top pairing defenseman. I still don't think he's a top pairing defenseman on this team or on any team in this league. I mean, he's a good, solid D2 pairing defenseman, and he could be a strong number one within the next couple of years if his confidence continues. And he's surrounded by coaches that understand how to utilize him.
That's a good point. And Adam brings up the question, do you think they're going to keep Yo as head coach? And I do. I think he's going to finish out the year for sure. And we'll see what they look like as the year ends. I don't think it's playoff or bust with Yo, because I think they're so far behind the 8 ball. I just think it's what we're seeing now. If they grasp the system, and it's kind of to Nick's point, you grasp the system and have a great win against the Devils and then come out looking like you do against the Canadians, and then you have a great first period like you did against Ottawa, and then play it the rest of the game like you did. And it's like, why is this team so Jekyll and Hyde? And that has nothing to do with coaching. They've been Jekyll and Hyde for years through multiple coaching staffs. So I don't know what it is with this team that will allow them to just stay the course and honor a system, honor a philosophy. I don't know. I don't know what that magical question is or what the magical answer is. But Adam, I do think he's going to finish the year out.
Yeah, I think it happens in sports no matter what. So we're in Philadelphia. We're isolated on what happens with our teams, and I do some wagering with hockey, and I've been getting when you talk about the underdogs that have been what happens in the NHL in general, which is what happened with the Flyers against Montreal, does happen more often than you think it does in general in the NHL, because I witnessed this firsthand last week with my wagers and getting crushed with underdogs just coming out of the woodwork and winning game after game after game for a while. So yeah, it's a long season. It weighs on you, and there are going to be letdown games. But the Flyers are not in position right now to put themselves in a situation where they're letting down on games they should win, because they just came out of a 10-game losing streak.
Correct.
So that's a little bit different. And I think that's what we're all harping on the fact that why are they coming out so lackluster against teams like the Canadians? But to Adam's point on Yo and your point, yeah, why wouldn't he be here right now? And I'm not, I went on record last week to say that I was not a fan of Yo, in particularly because of what happened with him in St. Louis, not in Minnesota. When you take the reins of a team and you're in last place and you get fired, and a coach that just got fired here goes on to take the reins behind the bench and lead the team to a Stanley Cup win, that's a little bit of a black eye on your resume. And that just didn't sit well with me. And that was one of my bones of contention with why I don't think he should be, the team, the coach to lead this team going forward. But from what I see from him and what I hear from him, and what he's planning to do to kind of restructure this system, and bring this team back from where we were 2 or 3 weeks ago with Vigneault, if not longer. I like it. I mean, and you know what? If he wins, he should be the guy. It's funny. You see comments on Twitter. I saw one comment. It was like, "Oh boy, if we keep winning, Mike Yeo is going to be our head coach." Yeah. Okay. That's if he keeps winning and he puts his team in a situation where they can, be better and continually get better going forward, then he should be the guy. If he doesn't, then he won't, so we'll see what happens.
Well, the mark of a good coach, the mark of a good employee, the mark of a good boss, whatever the profession is learning from your past mistakes.
Right.
He clearly feels the same way that you do, Nick. There's probably nothing more humiliating to him to know that a last place team that he got fired from went on to win the Stanley Cup. So he probably did a lot of reflecting and looked in the mirror and said, what do I need to do to change my ways if I ever get the opportunity again? And hopefully he's really done that and will do that and will learn his lesson from his time in St. Louis and prior in Minnesota, because he's been fired twice. Mm-hmm. But the guy, obviously anyone at this level, they know hockey. It's how are they getting the message through? Every locker room is different as far as the motivating factor is, but it's like they have to buy into whatever system that you're initiating, and hopefully that is the case. And like you said, why not stick with them if they win with them? So in that New Jersey game, we had the hat trick by Atkinson, and the great story of Max Willman started to develop. And then they had the flat game against Montreal, but again, Willman was the best player on the ice for the Flyers. Is this a temporary great story? God willing, the kid will get healthy and get back in the lineup soon because he's in COVID protocol right now. Hopefully it's just the old standards and he's not feeling sick. He just has the positive test and he's, not feeling the effects of it. But when he's on the ice, he flies. And he's playing like a kid that wants to stay in this league. Tell me what you know about Max Willman, and do you think he could develop into a complementary piece to a good hockey team?
I don't know much about his background. A little. I know he's a Massachusetts kid, and which I love to see. The U.S. players. I think they bring a certain type of game to the NHL that you don't see from European and Canadian players, and it's just more systematic than flashy, which I like. And obviously, he does have the skill set and he has the speed. I think he's a Harvard kid. So that'll tell you what he's like from a smart standpoint. So I see flashes of him that make me think that he could be a solid third line winger in this league long term. And then I see spots where I just, I see mental mistakes from him that question, whether he can learn from those kinds of things or not. So I think for me, the jury is still out on Willman. I like him and I'm rooting for him to do well. Like I said, because I love seeing kids with that background like him. make it to this point. But, we talked about this in previous shows. Our prospect pool is pretty good. We've got some other, names that are starting to make noise, particularly in the WHL with Connor McClellan, who's really going on a tear with the Winnipeg Ice. And I've gotten to watch a few of his highlights over the last week or two, and he's impressing me a lot. So, you put that together with what we're seeing, obviously, from Elliot Desnoyers, and, Bobby Brink is another name that we talk about a lot. Zayd Wisdom is healthy again. He could be an impactful player on this roster in the next couple of years, also from a physical standpoint, which is something that, he plays a very good, hard, physical, fast game. And then we still have Forster down there, which I think we all kind of love him and his skill set and what he brings, to a team. So we're all talking, strictly offensive players right now. But, when you talk about those players, you see where, who gets left off, what happens. It's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of years, but I'm all for bringing in these really hot young stars to kind of see what they can do and what they can bring, because I think this is the way the league is going now. Some of the best players in the league are in their early 20s. And these kids are young, with the exception of Brink, who's, he might be 22 already. Desnoyers is 19. McClellan, I believe, is 19. Forster's, 21. So, where Willman fits in, I don't know. Like I said, I do root for kids like that. And, I think he's got the skill set to definitely make it in this league. I like him better than what I've seen out of NAK at this point, and, where Willman is now and where NAK was at this time. But, I do root for him, and I think he'll be, I think he can. I said, like, at the end of the day, for me, the jury's still out.
Yeah, I have no delusions of grandeur here, thinking that he's going to all of a sudden turn into a perennial 25 goal scorer. That's not my point. My point is, you see these plug and play players like Jackson Cates. Jackson Cates has no future with the Flyers,
right?
Whereas Max Willman does. I mean, not that he does, but he is standing out more. Jackson Cates scored a goal. It was a close-in, bad 5-hole goal. But he's not jumping out at me on the ice. I wish him well, and I hope he takes advantage of his opportunity. But you can just tell the difference between a guy that's here because there's injuries and a guy that is here because of injuries, and he's going to make decisions hard for management. And that's what Willman looks like to me. I mean, if a guy like Michael Raffle could stick around for a while, this kid has some skill sets that Michael Raffle does not, if that makes sense. Now, I want to bring up a player that is not Flyer related, but he played against the Flyers, and it's the most baffling story of the year in Cole Caufield. In the game against the Flyers, he was the most dynamic, electrifying, standout player on the ice. Granted, he was having a lot of NAK moments where he would rip shots that wouldn't hit a soccer net, but he was just so noticeable on the ice. How does this kid only have one goal?
I don't know. I mean, he looked like he should have had 3 goals in that game if it wasn't for Hart. Yeah, but he was very dynamic in that game, and he is an incredible player. Obviously he's still very, very young, and I think we're all kind of a little bit spoiled from what we've seen, in his inauguration year in the NHL, just kind of light it up and go right from 0 to superstar status for a lot of people. But why does, I think it's got to, in my opinion, Dan, when things like that happen, I look to coaching first, not to say that that's the reason. But, putting young players in the right position as a head coach in the NHL is probably one of the most important things you need to do for the longevity of what you try, of your franchise and being productive. So, I kind of look towards that first. And but he puts everything together except for finishing right now. He's just not finishing, and that's going to happen. I mean, eventually he's going to come out of that. You saw that, it happened with Atkinson. It's kind of almost a very similar situation. I mean, the tale of two very different players, but Atkinson showed how, why we signed Atkinson in that game against the Devils. I mean, he scored 3 goals 3 different ways. By getting to the net, by ripping the wrister, by playing smart hockey and understanding where it needs to be productive. So, I think I love Caufield. I would not be one to give up on Caufield if I was Montreal at all. I know they sent him down for a short period of time and then brought him back up. I don't know what that does to a kid's psyche. You would think it would make them hungrier and make them understand that they've got to come back and play a better brand of hockey within themselves. But I think he's just got to try, I think he's got to work on his shooting a little bit more because he does everything else so well. And you're right, he does make some mistakes, on the back check and maybe, how he plays defensively because he is, so offensive oriented. And maybe, that was kind of a punishment, so to speak, to from the coaching standpoint to make him understand that that's what you need to do. You need to play a 100-foot game in this league. And, so that it's to me, Dan, to answer your question, I think it's probably more mental right now with him than anything, trying to figure out how to adjust from being a superstar his whole life to playing in the NHL out of the gate, being very dynamic and productive. And now just kind of confused on what his role is and what he needs to do to get back on track again.
Yeah, he's clearly gripping the stick too tight. And I equate it to a great hitter that's in a 0 for 20 slump. And once you get that first line drive up the middle, I think the floodgates will open with him. I think once he puts the puck in the top corner of a net, I think that sigh of relief is going to happen and he's going to go on a roll. But the kid's dynamic. I brought it up because we all see his greatness. And many predicted, I believe yourself included, he'd be the rookie of the year. So no, but I mean, it's not a bad call. He's just having that team's having one of those years. So let's if we go from one talented kid to a group of talented kids. Ottawa has an amazing young roster. They have names like Tkachuk, Norris, Batherson, Stützle, Shabbat, Zub. I mean, they've got a lot of young players that are beyond impressive. For me, Zub and Stützle and Shabbat dominated or stood out last night. Now Shabbat was a minus player, literally because he played every freaking minute of the game.
Right.
And that's going to be
he was on the I saw a stat. He was on the ice for the whole 36 minutes.
Yeah, that's insane. And he was
insane.
Yeah, you can't do that to a kid. You can't do that to a kid. I mean, all they have to do is call us, and we could tell them we've kind of toasted Ivan Provorov a little bit,
right?
And he was getting 27, 28 minutes a game. Right. So this kid's getting 30. He played 2 consecutive 36 games. But he played 32 against Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
So he's a great player. He was taken 19th overall in the Provorov draft, ironically, and he's really come into his own the past 2 years. But you can't do this to a player. I don't care how young he is. But that being said, they have a lot of great young talent, and I like the positioning of this team better than the positioning of our team going forward. Your thoughts on what you see from this young Ottawa Senators squad?
Well, it's exactly what I just said when we were talking about the prospects and having to make room for some of these kids that are so like uber talented. I mean, there's some really, I'm going to go back on McLellan. Like McLellan is a name that should probably be on this roster within the next 2 years. Okay. And so is Elliot Desnoyers. I mean, those two, they're not dominating their leagues by accident. So, when you talk about Batherson and Norris and Tkachuk, first of all, that's their top line. They all play together.
Yeah.
And they're young and they're dynamic and they're smart and they're good. And again, we talk about this over and over again. That's where the league is going. And to say you need to flood your roster with young players is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is you need, if you're going to balance your hockey team,
introduce veterans to the lineup.
Exactly. They have to be there. And I think Frost is going to be one of those kids too. Like I really feel like he's got the skill set. And when you talk about great dynamic players, if he was playing on another team that had the support and had the coaching mindset that understood where he needed to be in the lineup and how to play him, he would probably be off the chart, an off the charts kind of a player.
Last night, I sent you, I'm sorry to interrupt. Last night, I sent you an article by Lance Green of Flyers and Nitty Gritty. Lance is a terrific writer. No relation, by the way. We joke back and forth. He actually has a cousin named Dan Green. But Lance is a very talented writer. And his I don't know if you read the article about the failed drafts and player development of this team. Rubitsev, even Felix Sandstrom. You can't draft a guy in the 2015 draft in the second round and
Nolan Patrick.
Nolan Patrick, Jay O'Brien.
Jay O'Brien,
yeah. Just they've had bad drafts. Emil Andrade. The players, even the kid last year from that we took, I can't think of his name.
Sam Tamala.
Yeah, well, Lance broke it down that he's regressed in Sweden, and he's been sent down to the equivalent of the AHL in Sweden, while guys that he wanted picked after him are thriving with the elite team. So the bottom line is we do have young talent, but we've also, almost analogous to the Eagles, we've had some wasted years of drafting that are hurting this team right now. You can't have guys that were drafted in 15 and 16 that aren't even sniffing the NHL. Those are failed drafts. So, but the players you referenced, and he also referenced how Forster and Cam York aren't having great years right now with the Phantoms.
Well, Forster's hurt. I mean, they're both hurt. I mean, they've been back.
They've been back for a while, and their point production hasn't been fantastic. Maybe it's a matter of rust. And I'm not giving up on those guys because those guys are literally around the corner, hopefully.
Dan, I would like to add this to that point real quick on Forster and York. So when you have a skill set and you have a talent level in a young player, many times, their production or their abilities are being hampered by the players they're surrounded by at this lower level. So, think about you if you're, a really good athlete and you're a hockey player and you've got this great skill set, and all of a sudden now you've got two guys on either side of you or four players behind you and next to you that have a quite lower skill set and a quite lower idea on how to handle the game, how that will affect your production in particular. So, yes, I always try and balance what happens at a different level of hockey with players, but you can't always rely on the point production of what you're seeing in prospects because their support is not the same as it would be if they were playing on the main club in the NHL. So I think our viewers probably need to understand that too. But when you on the contrary, when you do see players that are producing like McLellan and Desnoyers are producing right now, you surround them with the likes of a Giroux and an Atkinson and a Farabee. It could be lights out. So, yes, we've had many failed drafts, and I feel like anymore, the NHL has pivoted so much in what they're seeing with the younger players, where it's like, if you're not in the league 2 or 3 years after being drafted, you're not going to be a top 6 player. So you're really at the end of the day going to wind up being a role player. So, if you're a career minor leaguer, you're a career minor leaguer. But we've got some players in our system. And I do think Forster is one of them, and I do think York is one of them, and I'm McLellan and Desnoyers, and I think Zayd Wisdom would be a player that could fill a roster spot on as well. And we haven't even touched on Ronnie Attard, who is, and Zamula, who are two more defensemen that could really, make an impact on this club over the next 2 years. So I just wanted to get my point across on that, where, what we're seeing out of production in the minor leagues doesn't always translate to what you see, in the NHL.
And also,
if it makes sense.
No, it does. And also part of the Flyers' problem is, it's a catch-22 because of the failed draft and the lack of talent. I mean, hopefully Farabee is a perennial 30, 40 goal scorer, and we got something in that kid. Giroux was really our last dynamic draft pick, if you really think about it. And part of the problem is, you're holding kids back because you're strapped with the salary cap and players that you have locked onto the roster. So they're being blocked to some extent as well. And then you have issues where, the Scott Laughtons of the world, you referenced the example with the minor league teammates. I don't think you've referenced 100 times. You don't think Lawton's ever been able to fulfill his potential because of the way they use him and the lines they put him on. So it's just food for thought. The article is, as much as I'm aware of the Desharnays and the Wisdoms and the Yorks and the Firsters, and I'm excited about that. Lance's article did make me go, holy moly, to some extent also, with the Emil Andrades and those type of players of the worlds that were drafted. But real fast, so the game we played against Ottawa, they came off of a 5 out of 7 game tear. They dominated Tampa Bay 4-0. They destroyed Florida 8-2. They beat Carolina. They had a tough 2-1 loss against Tampa Bay. They were playing lights out hockey. I didn't think they would beat Ottawa. Probably the best 15 minutes of hockey they played was in the first 15 minutes of the first period. Now, what was alarming and jumped out at me was the second we went to 4-4, how our game changed. We were collapsing. We were like, it was awful hockey. It was almost as if we've never been on 4-4 before. They were collapsing in the defensive zone. Jim Jackson pointed it out, and that changed the momentum of the game. And the bottom line is, though, they played very well, and then the rest of the game was an ebb and flow, a Jekyll Hyde game, as I call it. And they to their credit, they almost had a demoralizing loss. They had a gritty comeback and a nice overtime win by the player that we've been highlighting on this show today, Travis Sanheim. So it was indeed a good win against. I'm not going to, and I don't want to say, I remember, I don't know if you were with us last year. We had a little streak where we beat Buffalo, and one of the callers, not callers, one of the commenters was like, "You're talking about Buffalo," and I was like, "Yeah, but when you're struggling to get wins, a win's a win's a win." This is not your typical bad team, though. Ottawa was surging. Their confidence was developing. They beat some dynamic teams, and I think maybe they took us lightly, which gave us our really good first period. But so the bottom line is we have a 9 points out of 10-point stretch going right now. As awkward and as inconsistent as the hockey has been, you can't ask for much better other than having won all 5 games. So I'll introduce this question. Obviously we can't ask this every show, but with what you're seeing with Mike Yeo, with what you just talked about with the talent pool, with what that is on our roster and what the players are capable of, I'm going to pose this question to you, Nick. What does our future truly hold? Are we a rebuild waiting to happen? Is it just a matter of getting acclimated to a coach's system? Or is it minor tweaks here and there via free agency and youth coming up? Where do you see the direction of this team, big picture?
I see the trajectory going up. I don't think they're in a rebuild. I think there are some pieces, there's some areas where they need to make some changes over the next year or two. In particular, freeing up some space for some of these younger players that we just talked about. I think right now, offensively, our third line is struggling. And I think a good coach has to figure out what he needs to do to create more balance in our top 9. I think he's got the top 6 kind of figured out. But what's going on with that Hayes line right now is, how much. What are we seeing? What do we got to see for what happens on that third line to get more involved and be more productive? And I don't think the way it's set up right now, I don't think that he's got the right chemistry. And so I think that's contributing to what's happening to those players individually. I don't think they're in a rebuild. We've taken a good chunk of the offseason to shore up what we needed to do defensively. And I'm okay with what's happening there, especially with Zamula and York, in particular, probably ready to come up and play next year. We won't see Yandle back. That's a big problem. Right now you're playing without Ellis. So, goaltending, I think we're obviously in good shape there. So, that's not going to contribute to any sort of quote unquote rebuild type of situation. So I think when we look at the next year or two, we've got to look at the depth on the offensive side of the puck and what's going, I think some changes need to be made there. Obviously, there's some players that we could talk about, but I think we all, everybody that's you and I on this panel and everybody else that's either watching or listening to us knows who they are. If Mike Yeo can be the guy to make that happen. If not, obviously we're going to have to bring in a coach that can be a voice and bring a system to be conducive to what it is that we're trying to do right now, and evolve from where we've been over the last year and a half.
And a coach that they have to bring a coach in that they literally see as a long-term coach. And I that's a duh comment, but that's where I even have to backtrack on my initial reactionary thought of I want Tortorella in here. I don't anymore. I took a step back. I thought things through. You can't have a slash and burn coach when you have all this young talent coming in the near future. You have to have a patient coach. And that's where you referenced, I think last week, a former player that came up as a 19-year-old that is a solid assistant coach somewhere or former coach is the ideal candidate because they know what it's like to be that kid. So we have to think big picture because we have a lot of young players that need to be introduced to this lineup in the next few years. And you just can't have a revolving door of coaches or things will not materialize the way we want them to. All right, let's wrap up our show with what we have coming ahead. Now, you see it on Twitter. Who knows if the Tuesday game is going to happen with what's going on with COVID? If whatever their decisions, I think after this weekend they're supposed to rethink their whole strategy with their protocol. So let's see if Tuesday even happens. But for now, we have the Capitals home on Tuesday. We're at our rival. Well, they're both rivals, but we're at the crosstown rival Pittsburgh Penguins on Thursday. The following week, we have back-to-back Wednesday, Thursday at Seattle and at San Jose, a little West Coast trip. So we have 4 games to discuss. We'll probably do it. Our next Waking Up with Flyer and Ice will probably be in 2 weeks. We're going to give ourselves some time off. No sense coming back on Christmas weekend with just 2 games in tow. I'll probably put out my graphic post-game puck points for everyone if you're interested. But for having a show, we'll probably take a little bit of a hiatus. So, Nick, what do you see on the board points if you were to have the crystal ball in front of you?
I'm usually pretty confident when we get to this point in the show, Dan, and what's happening. But honestly, I don't know. Like you talk about Washington, Pittsburgh, and games, 2 games, the way this team is playing should probably lose, in Seattle and San Jose, 2 games, the way this team has been playing should probably win. I mean, it could be we beat Washington and possibly Pittsburgh in a shootout. And then, I just don't see them losing in Seattle. I know, of course, that could very well happen since that'll be their first game out west after getting out there, and then possibly losing to San Jose. So, I would be ecstatic with. I would be ecstatic with 6 points. I would be ecstatic with 6. Obviously, I'm sure you would too, and that's probably a dub point too. But let's say 5.
Yeah, that's where I'm leaning. I think they do what they do. One of these games against Pittsburgh or Washington, they'll play well. and then they'll probably have hopefully a competitive loss somehow or some way, maybe an overtime or a shootout. And then I think they win one of the games handily on the West, and the other game they have one of those Montreal Devil type of games where, like, dude, how could you play this way after you just played so great against Pittsburgh? You know, so 5 points would be, I would take it. I would take it. But Nick, thank you as always for getting up with me on a Sunday morning. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you as well for joining us on Waking Up with Flyer and Ice. Our buddy Adam, thank you for checking in. He says 4 points, so he's looking at 2 wins, 2 losses. We are Flyer and Ice. We are part of the Heat Ratio Sports Network. Stay on, because right after us is the Sports Skillet. Subscribe on YouTube, tap the bell, check us on all the podcasting platforms. We are everywhere. On behalf of Nick, I am Dan. Have a great, great holiday season, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Stay well, be safe, enjoy your family, everyone.